There is no doubt in Washington tonight that this is an intelligence disaster.
U.S.-Russian relations were chilled early in the year when the CIA announced one of its top agents was spying for the Soviet Union and then Russia.
In February 1994, an American CIA counterintelligence agent was arrested after spying for the USA's greatest rival, the Soviet Union. The betrayal went on for years and is now considered to be one of the worst disasters in the history of the CIA. The agent's actions led to death and pain for many loyal to America.
Rick was the worst kind of traitor, and I always said, you know, he could have worked for the KGB and given them pages and pages and pages of information that wouldn't have cost somebody their life.
This is the story of Rick Ames, a tale of greed, lies, and betrayal. It's also the story of the people that caught him, ending an almost decade-long Soviet infiltration of the CIA.
He really didn't think he had anything to worry about, that we would never, ever pinpoint him. But he was wrong.
During the Cold War, international espionage was a fact of life. The Soviets and the Americans had been spying on each other since being allies in the Second World War, and the practice has continued throughout the communist era into recent years. During the Cold War, information was key to understanding and outwitting one's enemy. It was vital to know what your opponent was up to. Without access to modern-day surveillance technology, both nations relied on secret agents to gather valuable intelligence. Both the Soviets and Americans had agents feeding them information from within their enemies' governments. As well as traditional intelligence agents, both countries utilized double agents, spies who were secretly working with the nation they were meant to be spying on. The system of mutual espionage between the world's two great superpowers had existed since the 40s, but in 1985, something happened that had never happened before. Many of America's most valuable assets were being uncovered and arrested.
In 1985, we began to lose cases, by which I mean Soviet officials working for us, and some of them disappeared. This led us to believe that something was wrong.
Agents who had been feeding the CIA information for decades were suddenly being captured. Over 30 American spies were compromised during this time, including those who had retired years before.
Polyakov had retired after 18 years of spying when the KGB pounced.
Dmitry Polyakov, one of the highest-ranking Soviet officials working for the USA, was arrested in 1986.
Polyakov was our crown jewel. He worked for us for so many years, and he achieved such a rank that rather than us looking at an organization through the eyes of one of our sources, looking at that organization from the bottom up.
Another huge loss was Adolf Tolkachev, who had been known as the billion-dollar spy. Considered to be one of the most successful U.S. assets throughout the entirety of the Cold War, Tolkachev had turned on his nation after witnessing the cruelty carried out by the Soviet government. He was arrested in 1985. Both men were later executed by the Soviets. It was clear to the CIA something was terribly wrong. After numerous theories were considered, they decided that there was a mole working within their organization. A small team was assembled to find the traitor, led by experienced CIA officer Jean Vertefray.
Trying to pin down a counterintelligence case when you're looking for a mole is always a very difficult and long-term job. When we compiled a list of how many people could have done it, we came up with 198 people.
Another member of the team was Sandy Grimes, who helped turn the list of almost 200 names into just a handful.
And those are people with access. They are not suspects.
And then it didn't take me too long to eliminate most of them.
The team began to question the last few potential moles, narrowing down their search with interrogation techniques and polygraph tests. One particular question they asked singled out a key suspect.
And Jean is a genius. She was the one who devised the question, and this one in particular was marvelous.
If you were going to volunteer to the Soviet government, how would you go about it?
Each potential mole that was interviewed gave a detailed account of how they would betray the USA, including specific examples and contacts they could theoretically use. However, one agent answered very differently, becoming flustered and avoiding specific examples. His name was Rick Ames.
Now, Rick Ames is generally very articulate. He
He loved the what-if questions his whole career. Well, we asked him the questions, and he was just taken back. And his reaction was so opposite what we would have expected from Rick, knowing he loved the back and forth.
Ames began working for the CIA while still in high school. After dropping out of college, he started working at the CIA full-time. Ames originally hadn't planned on building a career in intelligence, but after receiving good performance appraisals, he decided to stick it out.
Rick was very pleasant, bright, a little arrogant.
He also met his wife and fellow CIA officer Nancy Sedgebarth early in his career, and the couple got married in 1969. In 1981, Ames was stationed in Mexico City, while Nancy remained in New York. His work in Mexico was mediocre, and he began to engage in several extramarital affairs. In 1982, he began an affair with Maria del Rosario Casas de Puy, a Colombian diplomat and CIA informant. As well as his poor work affairs in Mexico, Ames was also a heavy drinker, finding himself in trouble after causing an altercation with a Cuban official while drunk. Despite his failings, Ames was transferred back to Washington in 1983. His new role was with the Department of Operations, working on Soviet counterintelligence. This gave Ames access to all CIA plans and operations active in the Soviet Union. He divorced Nancy the same year, marrying Rosario in 1985. However, it was around this time that Ames realized he had a problem. His divorce had proven expensive, but not as expensive as his new marriage.
And his wife, Rosario, she came from a very wealthy Colombian family. They were not wealthy any longer when Rick married her, but her grandfather had been wealthy. So Rosario thought she was entitled to a certain lifestyle that Rick's income could not meet.
Ames thought that his divorce from Nancy might end up bankrupting him, but miraculously, his financial situation somehow began to improve around this time. It was ultimately this fact that led Grimes and her team to investigate Ames's activities further.
The FBI staked out Ames's house and tapped his phones. The breakthrough had come from CIA analysis of his bank statements.
The CIA noticed that Ames and Rosario's lifestyle did not match their income. The couple lived a luxury lifestyle. Ames drove a luxury Jaguar, wore designer suits, and spent thousands renovating his home.
He not only had fixed his teeth, he was not only wearing $600 Italian loafers and beautiful suits, but there was just a self-confidence and an arrogance and a coldness.
Meanwhile, his wife racked up massive credit card payments that exceeded Ames's monthly salary. It was later discovered that Rosario owned more than 500 pairs of shoes and 60 purses. It became clear that Ames was collecting an income from another source. All the team had to do now was follow the money.
Grimes's job was to construct a massive, meticulous database of all of Ames's activities. What the database revealed was that Ames made a series of cash deposits in the bank, each time just hours after meeting with a Russian official.
And my God, it was unbelievable. On 17 May, Rick had reported having had a lunch with his Soviet contact. 18 May, there's a deposit into his checking account for $9,000.
During meetings with Russian officials sanctioned by the CIA, Ames had been selling names and secrets to the KGB. For almost a year, Ames was kept under almost constant CIA surveillance. After gathering sufficient evidence, the CIA moved in. Ames and Rosario were arrested in February 1994. Ames's arrogance was ultimately his downfall. After years of feeding the Soviets information, he had come to believe he was untouchable.
We were both females, and he seriously considered us dumb broads.
To the minute he was arrested, he had no idea he was in trouble.
Ames later described what he felt on the day that everything came crashing down.
Shock, depression, instant recognition of, one's life flashes before one.
After a 3-year investigation, the CIA mole had finally been captured. It was only then that the true extent of Ames's betrayal was discovered. He admitted to have given the Soviets the names of virtually every American spy he was aware of, including Polyakov and Tolkachev.
Ames gave the KGB a list of every known human asset the CIA had in the Soviet Union. The list had 20 names on it. Within a year, 10 of those people were executed.
How much damage did Rick Ames' treason create?
He basically wiped out all the U.S. government's human source collection.
He wiped out your ability to have eyes and ears on the ground.
Exactly.
It is estimated that Ames compromised at least 100 American intelligence operations in total. Oleg Gordievsky was another double agent exposed by Ames. Unlike many others, he managed to escape the Soviet Union alive.
I was seized by the KGB in May 1985. I was put under house arrest, but I managed to escape in July, alive, well, and safe. I was lucky. The others were shot in the dungeons of some KGB prison after long months of continuous threats and interrogations.
After his arrest, both Ames and his wife were charged with spying for the Soviet Union and for Russia. He pleaded guilty in April and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole.
What I did to those men, the situation of their families and others, and the kind of shame and the kind of remorse that I feel is something that is and I think always will be intensely personal to me.
Today, Ames is 82 years old and resides in a medium security prison in Indiana. He has expressed regret for what he did, but those who saw their allies die due to his actions had little sympathy.
When the judge said, "I find you guilty and I sentence you to life without parole," I went home and slept like a baby.
As for Rosario, she received a 5-year sentence for tax evasion and conspiracy to commit espionage as part of a plea bargain by Ames. She claimed to have no knowledge of Ames's illegal activities.
I share the shock and the outrage. You don't betray your mother, you don't betray your country, you don't betray your wife, you don't betray people.
Evidence was later discovered that indicated Rosario was well aware of where Ames's money was coming from, but chose to accept and even encourage it after the money started rolling in.
She was involved to a very small level, but she knew everything he was doing. We got them on a telephone call one day where he is on his way home from CIA, and she's asking if he cleared a dead drop, got some money that the Russians owed him, and her question to him was, "Did you do it?" And he gave her a real smart aleck answer. I don't recall what he said now, but she got mad and she said, "Don't be an ass. Did you do it?"
Unlike the American spies who turned their backs on their government for political or moral reasons, Ames sold his friends' names for one reason: money.
Well, the reasons that I did what I did in April of 1985 were personal, banal, and amounted really to kind of greed and folly. Simple as that.
While accepting that his motivations for treachery were solely financial, Ames has implied he was just another spy.
That men like Polyakov gave up names. They gave up secrets. I did the same thing. For reasons that I considered sufficient to myself. I gave up the names of some of the same people who had earlier given up others. It's a nasty kind of circle.
Despite his attempts to justify his actions, the families and friends of those Ames betrayed may never forgive his treachery.
He knew full well what fate awaited them. And he did it basically for money.
To this day, Rick Ames remains one of the most effective double agents in history. The information he supplied led to the total devastation of the United States spy network in the USSR. Those who turned on the Soviet Union were largely driven by the failures of their government. The Soviet leadership prioritized communism over freedom, peace, and democracy, persecuting and murdering its own people for decades. Ames didn't have this incentive. The American people enjoyed a free and democratic society. However, it was a society driven by the pursuit of personal wealth. Was it this capitalist mindset that ultimately drove Ames to betray his country and sell the names of his friends to the enemy? Was it ultimately the failure of capitalism in the US that led to its betrayal, just like the failures of communism had done in the Soviet Union? Thanks for watching this episode of History 101. Don't forget to subscribe for more.